The American pony car would get a bit bulkier in the early 1970s. Plymouth Barracuda went into its third and final generation in 1970, and sales for the first year were just under $55,000. Prices typically ranged from $2,700 to $3,400, and it was 187 inches long on a 108-inch wheelbase and 3,100 to 3,600 pounds. Engines included a 3.7-liter slant 6 with 145 gross horsepower, or 110 net, or V8s and 5.2-liter 318, 5.6-liter 340, 6.3-liter 383, 7-liter 426 Hemi, and 7.2-liter 440, with horsepower ranging from 230 to 425 gross, or 150 to 350 net. A Hemi Cuda could do roughly 135 miles an hour and the quarter mile in just over 13 seconds. But for those who wanted a better handling version, there was the All-American Racer, or AAR. Dodge introduced the Challenger the same year. In spite of the similar look, it was bigger at 191 inches long on a 110-inch wheelbase, but remained in the 3,100 to 3,600 pound weight range. Prices started from $2,800 to $3,500 for an RT Special Edition. Engines were the same as Plymouth, but Dodge sold 80,000 the first year. The handling package was the TA340, but an RT 440 6-pack with 390 gross horsepower did a mid-13-second quarter mile and a top speed just under 110. Chevrolet introduced a restyled Camaro for mid-year 1970. It was 188 inches long on a 108-inch wheelbase and 3,200 to 3,600 pounds. The 1971 model had a starting price between $2,900 and $3,000, and sales for the year were just under $115,000. In addition to a base 4.1-liter straight 6, there was a 5-liter 307, 5.7-liter 350, and for a short time, 6.6-liter 396. Horsepower ranged from 145 for the 6 to 330 gross for the LT1 350, or 110 to 275 net. A Z28 was good for a mid-14-second quarter mile and speeds over 125 miles an hour, and it was considered one of the best handling cars on the market. AMC restyled the Javelin for 1971. It was 192 inches long on a 110-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,900 to 3,300 pounds. Priced from $2,900 to $3,400, sales were just over $25,000. Engines included a 3.8-liter 232 or 4.2-liter 258 straight 6, and a 5-liter 304, 5.9-liter 360, or 6.6-liter 401 V8. Horsepower was 135 to 335 gross, or 100 to 255 net. A 401 AMX did a mid-14-second quarter mile with a top speed around 115. The last restyle of the first-generation Mustang arrived for 1971, priced from $2,900 for a base model to $4,100 for a Boss 351. Total sales were just under $150,000. At 190 inches long on a 109-inch wheelbase and 3,100 to 3,600 pounds. The base engine was a 4.1-liter 250 straight 6 with 145 gross horsepower. V8s came in 4.9-liter 302, 5.8-liter 351, and 7-liter 429, with 230 to 375 gross horsepower, or 141 to 275 net. The Boss did 115 miles an hour with a quarter mile just over 14 seconds. The Pontiac Firebird of 1971 had a price range of $3,000 to up to $4,600 for a Trans Am. It was 192 inches long on a 108-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,200 to 3,700 pounds. Sales for the year were over $50,000. Engines ranged from a 4.1-liter straight 6 through a 5.7-liter 350, 6.6-liter 400, and 7.5-liter 455, with 145 to 335 gross horsepower, or 110 to 305 net. A Trans Am was a low 14-second car with 120 mile-an-hour top speed. Like the Mustang, Mercury restyled the Cougar for 1971. 197 inches long on a 112-inch wheelbase, it was 36 to 3,800 pounds. Price $3,300 to $3,900. Sales were just under $65,000 for the year. The only engines were the 5.8-liter 351 and 7-liter 429, with horsepower ranging from 240 to 370 gross. An XR7 with a 429 did a mid-14-second quarter mile and had a top speed over 135. The Chevrolet C3 Corvette got its first minor refresh in 1970, costing $4,800 to $5,200, more than 15,000 sold for the year. It was 183 inches long and a 98-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,300 to 3,500 pounds, with either a 5.7-liter 350 or 7.5-liter 454. Horsepower was 300 to 460 gross, or 255 to 360 net, for a low 13-second quarter mile and speeds just under 150. The Bricklin SV1 was introduced in 1974, with prices starting at $7,500. Less than 800 were made for the year. It was 179 inches long on a 96-inch wheelbase and 3,500 pounds, initially using an AMC 5.9-liter 360 with 220 net horsepower, allowing for a quarter mile in the mid-15s and a top speed around 120. Volkswagen de Brazil produced the SP2 from 1972 to 1976. It was 166 inches long on a 95-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,000 pounds, powered by an air-cooled 1700 Boxer 4 with 74 gross horsepower, making it capable of 100 miles an hour, and more than 10,000 would be sold. The British Sunbeam Rapier Fastback, or Alpine GT in the US, was priced under 1,100 pounds in the UK. It was 175 inches long and a 99-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,300 pounds. The 1.7-liter inline-4 produced 94 to 110 gross horsepower, or 88 to 93 net, making it capable of doing the quarter mile in under 18 seconds and exceeding 100 miles an hour. 14,000 were made over its 8 years. Production of the TVR Vixen was typically a couple hundred a year. It was 145 inches long on a 90-inch wheelbase, just over 1,600 pounds, and powered by a Ford 1.3-liter, or, more commonly, 1.6-liter inline-4. Tunes varied to provide 63 to 115 horsepower, with even the base 1300 being able to exceed 90 miles an hour, and top versions 110. Having sold 400,000 its first 2 years, the Mark I Ford Capri got a minor facelift for 1971, available in 1300, 1600, 2-liter, and 3-liter, for 61 to 143 gross horsepower, or 54 to 126 net. It sold in the U.S. as a Mercury, starting at $2,300. It was 168 inches long on a 101-inch wheelbase, and 2,000 to 2,500 pounds. A 3000 GT did a low 16-second quarter mile and more than 110 miles an hour. The MGB would climb into the $4,100 to $4,500 price range by the end of the period. At 159 inches long on a 91-inch wheelbase, it weighed 2,300 pounds. Most use a 1.8-liter inline-4 with 78 to 92 net horsepower for a mid-17-second quarter mile and a top speed of 105. But the GT Coupe could be had with a Rover 3.5-liter V8 with 137 horsepower, making it more than a second quicker and 20 miles an hour faster. The Lotus Elan Plus 2 cost around 2,000 pounds. It was 169 inches long on a 96-inch wheelbase and 1,900 to 2,000 pounds. The overhead cam Ford 1.6-liter Ford produced 113 to 126 horsepower for a 16-second quarter mile and a top speed near 130. The Reliant Scimitar SC5 was a shooting brake that ran until 1975, the coupe being discontinued in 1970. Originally priced around 1,800 pounds, it was 171 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase and 2,500 pounds. The Ford 3-liter V6 produced 144 gross horsepower, or 128 net, for speeds near 120 miles an hour and a mid-16-second quarter mile. Triumph's TR6 was 156 inches long on an 88-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,400 pounds, and using a 2.5-liter straight 6. The fuel-injected version had 125 to 150 horsepower, although the carbureted versions that came to North America had 103 to 106 horsepower. But they could still reach around 110 miles an hour, compared to 120 for the fuel-injected versions. The Morgan Plus 8 was just the 8-cylinder version, and the familiar design was already 20 years old by this time. It was 146 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase, weighing about a ton. The Rover 3.5-liter V8 produced 184 gross horsepower, or 168 net. It could do roughly 120 miles an hour and a mid-14-second quarter mile. The Series 3 Jaguar E-Type was introduced in 1971 and offered a new 5.3-liter V12. Available as a roadster or 2+2 coupe, they were 184 inches long on a 105-inch wheelbase and about 3,400 pounds. With 314 gross horsepower, or 272 net, it could reach around 150 miles an hour and do a low 14-second quarter mile. Aston Martin's DBS was 181 inches long on a 103-inch wheelbase and weighed 3,500 pounds. Less than 800 were made. The 4-liter straight 6 produced 282 horsepower net for a top speed near 145 and a quarter mile just over 15 seconds, and would soon evolve into the DBS V8. In 1971, the Jensen Interceptor would upgrade to a Chrysler 440, or 7.2-liter. The cars were 188 inches long on a 105-inch wheelbase and nearly 4,100 pounds. With 385 gross horsepower, or 330 net, it could do 150 miles an hour and the quarter mile in just over 14 seconds. The French Renault 17 was just under 1,400 pounds in the UK. It was 168 inches long on a 96-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,200 to 2,300 pounds. The 1.5-liter engine had 101 to 118 gross horsepower, or 89 to 107 net, for speeds over 110 and a quarter mile under 18 seconds. While the Alpine A110 was 152 inches long on an 83-inch wheelbase and 1,200 to 1,600 pounds. With either a 1,300 or 1,600 Renault 4, it had 102 to 118 gross horsepower, or 87 to 109 net, good for a quarter mile under 15 seconds, and speeds over 125. In Germany, Volkswagen's Karmann Ghia ran until 1975, with nearly 500,000 built globally over its 20 years. It was 163 inches long on a 95-inch wheelbase, weighing 1,800 pounds, finishing its run with a 60 horsepower 1600. The original Opel Manta was introduced at the end of 1970, 169 inches long on a 96-inch wheelbase, and about 2,100 pounds. The 1.6-liter 4 produced 67 to 72 horsepower net for up to 100 miles an hour and a quarter mile in the high 18-second range. Porsche was offering several versions of the 911 by the early 1970s, 164 inches long on an 89-inch wheelbase and around 2,300 pounds. Powered by either a 2.2 or 2.3-liter Boxer 6, horsepower ranged from 140 to 197 gross, or 123 to 178 net. An S Coupe could do nearly 140 miles an hour and a 15-second quarter mile. Mercedes SL went into its third generation in 1971, 173 inches long on a 97-inch wheelbase, weight ranged from 34 to 3,500 pounds. Initially offered with a 3.5-liter or 4.5-liter V8. Horsepower was 197 to 222 net, meaning a 450 SL could do a high 15-second quarter mile and exceed 130 miles an hour. The Swiss Monteverdi High-Speed 375 came in several versions, but still only accounted for a handful of cars. A 1971 375S was 182 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase, weighing 4,000 pounds. The Chrysler 7.2-liter 440 produced 370 gross horsepower for a mid-14-second quarter mile and a top speed around 155. The Italian Fiat Dino 2400 ran from 1970 to 1973. Less than 3,000 were made, and only 420 were the Spider, which had unique styling and was 163 inches long on a 90-inch wheelbase and 2,800 pounds, while the coupe was 177 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase and 3,000 pounds. The 2.4-liter Ferrari-sourced V6 produced 177 horsepower net, making for speeds over 125 miles an hour and a high 15-second quarter mile. The Dino 246 GT was introduced in 1969, costing £5,500 in the UK, and nearly $3,600 would be made. It was 165 inches long on a 92-inch wheelbase, weighing less than 2,400 pounds. The 2.4-liter dual overhead cam V6 produced 192 horsepower net for speeds near 150 miles an hour and a low 14-second quarter mile. The Alfa Romeo Montreal was introduced in 1970, initially costing nearly £5,100 in the UK. It was 166 inches long on a 93-inch wheelbase and weighed 2,800 pounds. Power came from a 2.6-liter, 158 cubic inch V8 with 227 gross horsepower. The net rating was 30 less, but it could do 140 miles an hour and the quarter mile in under 15 seconds. The Lancia Stratus of 1973 saw production of nearly 500. It was 145 inches long on an 86-inch wheelbase and under 2,200 pounds. The 2.4-liter V6 produced approximately 185 net horsepower for a quarter mile under 13.5 seconds and a top speed of 145. De Tomaso produced the Pantera in 1971, making more than 7,200 over the next 20 years, initially being 167 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,900 pounds, and using a Ford 5.8-liter 351 Cleveland V8 that produced 310 gross horsepower, or 266 net, for a high 13-second quarter mile and speeds around 150 miles an hour. The Maserati Indy was a GT made from 1969 to 1975. More than 1,100 would be made. It was 187 inches long on a 102-inch wheelbase and 35 to 3,700 pounds. The V8 came in 4.2, 4.7, and 4.9 liters, with 256, 286, or 315 net horsepower. A 4900 could do nearly 160 miles an hour and the quarter mile in under 14 seconds. The Ferrari 356 GTC4 was 179 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,800 pounds, costing more than $27,000. Just over 50 were made over 2 years. The 4.4-liter V12 produced 315 to 335 horsepower net for speeds over 160 miles an hour and a low 13-second quarter mile. Lamborghini's Jarama 400 GT was made from 1970 to 1976. It cost close to $24,000 and a little more than 300 were made. 177 inches long on a 94-inch wheelbase and 3,400 pounds, the 3.9-liter V12 produced 345 net horsepower, making it capable of 160 miles an hour and a high 13-second quarter mile. The ISO Grifo Series 2 arrived in 1970 with a minor facelift and a bigger 7.4-liter Chevrolet 454. It was 174 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase and 3,600 pounds. Horsepower was around 350 net, with a claimed top speed of 300 kilometers per hour, or 186 miles per hour. From Sweden, the Saab Sonnet 3 was 154 inches long on an 85-inch wheelbase and 1,800 pounds. The 1.7-liter Ford V4 produced 72 gross horsepower, or 64 net, for a low 18-second quarter mile and speeds near 110 miles an hour. The Volvo P1800 ran until 1973, having sold nearly 40,000 coupes and more than 8,000 of the shooting brake, or estate sport. It was 171 to 173 inches long on a 97-inch wheelbase, weighing 25 to 2,600 pounds. The 1800E of 1970 produced 130 horsepower for a mid-17-second quarter mile and a top speed over 110. From Japan, Mazda's RX-3 started at nearly $3,000 in 1972, soon reaching as high as $5,000. It was essentially just a rotary-powered Familia, 160 inches long on a 91-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,000 pounds. The 1-liter twin-rotor Wankel produced 105 gross horsepower for a quarter mile in the high 17s and a top speed near 105. While Honda's 1300 GTL Coupe was 163 inches long on an 89-inch wheelbase and 2,000 pounds. The overhead cam inline 4 made 109 gross horsepower for a mid-17-second quarter mile and speeds near 110 miles an hour. The Toyota Celica started at just over $1,700 and could exceed $3,600 for top models. 164 inches long on a 96-inch wheelbase, it weighed 2,100 pounds, initially with a 1.6 liter with 113 horsepower, for an 115 mile-an-hour top speed and a low 18-second quarter mile. Isuzu's first Series 117 coupe ran through 1972. It was 167 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,300 pounds. Powered by an 118 gross horsepower 1.6 liter, it could do the quarter mile in under 18 seconds and nearly reach 115 miles an hour. The Mitsubishi Colt Galant GTO was 162 inches long on a 95-inch wheelbase and 2,100 to 2,200 pounds, offered with a 1.6 liter inline 4 with 99 to 123 gross horsepower, taking just over 17 seconds to do the quarter mile and reaching near 115 miles an hour. The Datsun 240Z started at just over $3,500 in the U.S. It was 163 inches long on a 91-inch wheelbase and 2,300 pounds. The Straight 6 had 150 gross horsepower, or 134 net, for a mid-16-second quarter mile and a top speed around 125. The new Nissan Skyline GTR of 1972 was 176 inches long on a 103-inch wheelbase and weighed 2,500 pounds. Its 2-liter straight 6 produced 160 horsepower for a high 16-second quarter mile and a top speed of 120. A list of iconic cars that hardly suggests the direction the market would soon head in. But as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.